Hi there, this is John Lebensold for killerphp.com, and today what I'm going to be doing is a very short introduction, a 7-part, so maybe it's not so short, introduction to jQuery. We're going to be looking at how you can get jQuery set up on your own local website, how to use Google's content delivery network to speed things up. Then we're going to be looking at events in jQuery, making some really cool animations and buttons and menus. And then we're going to look at the server side. So we're going to try and incorporate PHP into our jQuery project. Finally, looking at something called JSON. Not the person, it's actually a interchange format like XML, but far cooler. And then we're going to finish this by creating some objects in PHP and then passing them along to jQuery and seeing what we can make of that. So this is the first part. We're going to look at how you can actually get jQuery installed on or included in part of a project. So I've got this domain right here called static. This is my own local machine, and for the first couple of videos you won't actually need to have a web server. We're going to be doing this primarily from our disk locally, and then as we start using PHP, then we're going to have to move away from simply using HTML to also using PHP. But since this is Killer PHP, I'm sure you're already familiar with that stuff. So you might have also noticed there's a toolbar up here that doesn't come with Firefox. It's called the Web Developer toolbar. It's handy, but we're not going to be using it for this tutorial set. However, I do want to touch on this little icon down here, which is a little bug, and this is Firebug, and you can get Firebug at the add-ons website for Firefox. So if you just do a search for Firebug into the mighty Google search engine and go to getfirebug.com, you can grab yourself a copy of Firebug. And it's really handy for doing JavaScript debugging and also development, because you can stop at any point and profile or figure out what variable content is actually appearing on your website. So we'll look at that as well. So let's start by just getting jQuery. Obviously, the first place you would probably look is jquery.com. And this is the jQuery website. On the right over here, you'll see that there is a download link for jQuery. You'll notice that there are two different versions that they talk about here. They've got a production version and a development version. And for our purposes, we're going to be using the production version. And minified and gzipped, basically what that means is that the jQuery library has been compressed down to its smallest possible form so that it's nice and light for your users to download it. So we're just going to click on the download link for jQuery, and we're going to be taken to a Google code page. Click on that link, and you can see that it's already downloading it. So you'll see jQuery appear on my desktop, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it and drag it to, for me it's my sites folder, into the static folder. Now this is the folder that I'm using for my particular project, and if I go back to static here, you'll see that I don't have anything except for the jQuery file. In order to use the jQuery minified version, we need to create some HTML, and the HTML is going to make reference to the jQuery file that we've just downloaded from jquery.com. So if I click on this, let's just get a sense of what it looks like. You'll see that there's a whole bunch of what looks like a lot of garbage, and this is the compressed version of jQuery. So you're not going to be able to make heads or tails of it, but luckily the documentation exists on docs.jquery.com, and we're going to be looking a bit at how we can actually use this wonderful library. So to start off with, I'm going to be using a text editor, and my text editor of choice is BBEdit. And you can, of course, use Notepad or anything else, TextMate, Text Wrangler, Notepad++, they're all fantastic. And I'm going to start by creating a new file. So I'm just going to say File, New Text Document. And we're going to start by just creating a very simple HTML structure with a head and a body. And I'm going to put in the necessary doc type information, which I have a hard time remembering, so you'll have to forgive me. I'm just going to grab it from here. We're going to be using the XHTML transitional doc type. I'm just going to copy that and paste that in here, and that should be it. So now I'm just going to hit save, and we're going to put this file into my static folder. So I'm just going to call this getting jquery.html. We're going to go back to Firefox. If I refresh this, you'll see that now there's a file that shows up called getting jquery.html. If I click on it, I don't see anything. However, if I put a header 1 in the body tag, under or within the body tag, saying getting jQuery, hit save, then we're actually going to see some text, which is great. Now we need to actually reference the jQuery library. And in order to do that, we just need to use the script tag. So I'm just going to write script type equals text / JavaScript src, and here we're going to be referencing this file, and I'm just going to paste that in, and we'll just close that script tag. Actually, we're going to do it this way. It's just another way of closing a tag. Hit save, refresh it again, and we shouldn't see any changes, but jQuery should have been loaded. Not very exciting yet, but we're going to be using this a lot in the tutorials to come. So because this tutorial is really quite short, I'm going to take this opportunity to show you some of the logging features of Firebug that you might find me using later on. So in order to use jQuery, all you need to do is have some JavaScript on the page, and then you're good to go. So I'm going to say a script tag with new type text / JavaScript. We're going to open this up, and ideally when you're creating your JavaScript, you don't want to put it in the middle of your website. You want to keep it in a separate file ID, or at the very least at the top of the page. So let's say I wanted to get the header 1 here, and I wanted to somehow do something with it using jQuery. Well, if I was using this with traditional JavaScript, I would have to make sure that my JavaScript runs after the h1 has been read by the browser. Let me give you a quick example of that. So if we were doing this with typical JavaScript, I would do script type equals text / JavaScript. And we can just use our alert, and I would do document.getElementById. Now we need to, of course, attribute this or ascribe it some kind of identifier, so we'll say title. And here I would say title and inner HTML. Now, if I take this little chunk of JavaScript, if you've seen any JavaScript before, then you'll know that what you're seeing here is that we're looking at the document, which is the whole page, basically, and we're saying get element by ID. In other words, let's just grab that one ID called title, which we've specified up here, and give me the inner HTML. In other words, give me everything inside that tag. So if I hit save and I refresh this page, we're going to see getting jQuery. Perfect. However, if I take this script tag or this block of JavaScript and I run it beforehand and I refresh it, it's not going to run. In fact, we're going to see a little error appear at the bottom right if we're using Firebug, and it's going to tell us that this is a no-go because it's going to say that this is null. So actually, the way that the browser renders this is it's all done sequentially. It's done in the order in which it appears. Now jQuery has a very nice feature to basically mitigate or deal with this problem. All we have to do is we have to use the $sign. So if I say $sign, open bracket, close bracket, or actually just open bracket, and then function, and then if I were to take this code that I've got here and move it into the head of the page, this should actually work. So if I refresh it again, getting jQuery appears. And the reason is that the $sign in jQuery is actually just the name of a function. And what's going on in the background is that jQuery will only run this when the $sign has been fully loaded and the page has been fully loaded. So you don't need to worry about having a half completed page rendering a whole bunch of JavaScript. Now let's see if we can clean this up some more. Alerts tend to be kind of annoying when you're doing debugging, especially since if you've got a lot of events happening on a page, it's hard to properly log them. So instead of using the alert, I'm going to use console.log. And this is a feature of the Firebug extension, where if I save this now and I refresh this, we're not going to see anything. However, if I open Firebug again in my console, I'll see getting jQuery. So already things are a little cleaner and it's easier to track things without having all these things pop up. Now let's see if we can do a little better than this. Instead of saying document.getElementById, I'm just going to use the $sign, which is the jQuery function, and then I'm going to say pound title. Now the pound comes from the CSS style of grabbing different elements on the page, which is exactly how jQuery works. So just like in CSS, when I want to grab an ID called title, I do the same thing with jQuery. So I'm grabbing that ID called title, and instead of saying inner HTML, what I really want is the text. If I refresh this again, nothing should change, but getting jQuery will still appear on the log. And also this code is far more descriptive and it's a lot more elegant. Now the last little thing I want to talk about here is how we can use Google's content delivery network. So when you're working on a larger project, you might want to speed things up by using CDNs, or content delivery networks. And these are networks of computers that exist around the planet and that can serve up content. You know, if I was, let's say, doing this tutorial in Australia, then I would be hitting the Australian Google server versus the American Google server or the Canadian Google server. So it's a great way of speeding up those requests for standardized content. In this case, we're talking about jQuery. And Google has this wonderful content delivery network that they're providing for a whole bunch of AJAX libraries, like jQuery or Dojo or Prototype or Scriptaculous. These are all libraries for doing client-side JavaScript. So instead of the script type text / JavaScript jQuery -1.3.2.min.js, instead of this, we're going to change our source to the Google Content Delivery Network. So here what we're going to do is we're going to go to http://ajax.googleapis.com/JSAPI. In other words, JavaScript API. So that's the first step. Now if I save this and I refresh this, you'll notice that I'm going to get an error. And that's because when we use the Google Content Delivery Network, we need to do a little bit more configuration than just changing our source. I'm going to just copy this URL and show you the web page in case you want to look at it later on. But if you go to ajax.googleapis.com, or actually I believe it's just googleapis.com, or Ajax Google APIs. Oh, here we go. It's on code.google.com APIs Ajax libs. And you can see that they've got Ajax libraries for everything from jQuery to Prototype to Dojo MooTools. And there's even some sample code. you'll notice that not only do we have to reference the JavaScript API, but we also have to specify which library we want to run. And just like in the initial example where we had the $sign to make sure that the page wouldn't start executing JavaScript until it was fully loaded, Google has their own approach where they have google.setOnLoadCallback function. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say google.load. We'll just copy that, paste that in. And here, the version that I want is the same as the one I have on my current machine. So it's 1.3.2. And instead of the $sign function, I'm going to do google.setOnLoadCallback and have a function. And this way, the code that happens to appear within here is only going to load once the Google Content Delivery Network has been accessed and the JavaScript has been downloaded to the browser. So if we go back and we refresh this page again, you should see, we're getting a syntax error. That's because there's two curly braces. But if I refresh this page again, you'll see that it takes a little longer, at least initially, because I have to cache the version of jQuery from the Content Delivery Network, but the functionality is the same. Now we're going to be using the Google JavaScript API in some of the tutorials, and we're going to be using a local version in others, but they're really interchangeable. But having the option of using the Content Delivery Network is definitely nice, especially on high traffic websites. So that's part one. In part two, we're going to be looking at events and firing off events and also a bit of animation. Thanks for listening.